Welcome to my presentation for Model 12, our case study for school law. My name is Tammy Sheffield, and I am going to walk you through what my decisions were based off of the scenario we were given. So for this assignment, we were using Standard 6, Operations and Management, which is candidates who successfully complete a building level educational leadership preparation program understand and demonstrate the capacity to promote the current and future success and well-being of each student and adult by applying knowledge, skills, and commitments necessary to improve management, communication, technology, school-level governance, and operation systems to develop and improve data-informed, equitable school resource plans and apply laws, policies, and regulations. And for Standard 6, we were looking at Component 6.3, Program Completers Understand and Demonstrate the Capacity to Reflectively Evaluate, Communicate about, and Implement Laws, Rights, Policies, and Regulations to Promote Student and Adult Success and Well-Being. So with that standard in mind, I read the scenario and took on the role of principal sample to make my decisions about this particular scenario. So for a summary of the case, we are looking at the small rural school of St. Regis, which decided to use the money that was raised from fundraisers to purchase computers and software programs for use by the students and teachers in the school. They set up a computer lab with 20 computers, and the new educational software programs were purchased specifically for use on the lab's computers. Once the programs were put in place, many of the teachers at the school voiced they would like to have copies of the software programs to use on the computers in their classrooms. The classroom computers were not part of the computers for which the software programs were initially purchased. So the school's librarian/media specialist agreed to make copies and distribute the copied programs to the teachers at St. Regis for use on the classroom computers. One teacher who was new to the school, Mrs. Brandon, familiar with copyright laws and consequences of violating those laws, voiced her concerns to the principal, aka me. When the principal asked her about the copied software programs, Mrs. Lynn argued that she was saving the school money by making copies for teachers to use on the classroom computers. Mrs. Lynn also pointed out that the teachers and PTA members who are aware of what she was doing are unlikely to contact the publisher and let the publisher know that the programs had been copied. The principal, me, requested she stop copying and distributing the software programs. He also asked her to retrieve any copies she had already given to the teachers. Well, obviously there's a lot of questions and concerns about what the legal and ethical issues are concerning what Mrs. Lynn did. So we're going to break those things down right now. If we're looking at persons that could be harmed by this, obviously the most obvious one is the software publishers, because they are losing revenue and not getting credit for their work with the copied CDs. We could also say that the students and teachers of the school could be harmed by this, especially if the publishers are made aware of the copyright infringement and they pursue damages for using that copyrighted material or that material that was protected by copyright. The students and staff at the school could face some pretty financial hardships. The contravene of an existing law, obviously there are some leeway with copyright laws as far as education is concerned, but this was a program specifically purchased for use in schools using educational software, and copyright law on the distribution of copyrighted materials. Like I said, even though there's some exceptions to the copyright laws for educational use, the law does not include the distribution of copyrighted software programs. Such was done in this case study. As far as a breach of contract, the library media specialist was in breach of contract when she knowingly distributed copyrighted material. She put teachers and students at risk of the consequences of using the software programs without the publisher's consent. So just to kind of synthesize what happened, to save the school and the family some money, Mrs. Lynn, our library media specialist, copied and distributed software programs without consent of the publisher to do so, which put the school district, and anyone using the copied software programs at risk of the consequences that could come with those violations. So let's look a little bit at the facts. The people involved are our students. There are 420 students, grades K through 8, at this particular school, St. Regis. It is the only school in the community. All the high school students, once they move on to high school, they're sent to the larger city, 25 miles away, to the high school there. The community, the people in the community that are involved, we have the PTA, who hold fundraisers to raise money to supplement the schools, the money the school gets from state and federal funds. Mrs. Evans, is the PTA president and a person that volunteers in the library. She was also helping Mrs. Lynn copy the software programs. I don't know if she was aware of copyright laws, especially in the educational setting, but I'm going to assume she wasn't fully knowledgeable about those copyright laws. Anyway, she did help Mrs. Lynn copy the programs that were later distributed to the teachers. The teachers involved in the school, or the teachers in the school, we have 2 teachers per grade level and 2 special education teachers, one for grades K through 4 and one for grades 5 through 8. Mrs. Williams is an experienced teacher with the school. She received some of the copied CDs and did not feel there was a problem with using them in her classroom. Mrs. Brandon is the other teacher that was directly involved in this. She is new to the school, but she did teach at another school prior to joining our staff. She is the one that brought the copyright issue to the attention of the principal, myself. She, based off of her prior knowledge from her other school that she worked at, felt like this could be a severe problem and that could come with severe consequences for our school, so she felt it was her duty to bring it to my attention. The principal at the school in the scenario is Keith Sample. Obviously, I'm taking on the persona of Keith Sample and looking at this whole thing from his standpoint. And our library media specialist, Mrs. Lynn, who is the one that made the choice to copy the programs and distribute them to the teachers. Our place. This incident took place in a rural community which is located 25 miles from a major city and is very representative of a lot of school districts around this country. Within the community, they get their basic goods and services from 2 grocery stores, a drugstore, and a few other small businesses. Everything else they need to either do through like mail order or go to the larger city. That's 25 miles away. There is 1 school in the district. It is St. Regis, which services students in grades K through 8. Within the school itself, we have the library and media center. And attached to that, we now have a computer lab with 20 computers, which basically means the computer lab has 1 computer for every 21 students. In the classrooms, we do have 1 computer in each room for student use. Right, and the program we're dealing with, this is a public school with 1 computer lab of 20 computers for 420 students. Like I said, that is 1 computer for every 21 students. The software programs that we are using do clearly indicate that they are copyrighted materials with restrictions that govern the reproduction of multiple copies without permission from the author. So, a review and prioritization, of the information. We're looking at damages possibly to the stakeholders and the community. There could be fines of up to $250,000 for the infractions of copying the software programs. And if you think about that, depending on how many copies she made of that, that's $250,000 for each infraction. That could devastate the school a lot. That definitely would create a financial hardship, and the fines would end up depleting money used for the educational purposes. We could also lose state and federal funding, and ultimately at the extreme end of this, looking at losing the ability to keep the school open. Thus would cause us to have to send kids to the larger city in order to be able to go to school. The individuals and groups with important stake in the outcome, obviously the teachers in the school, getting fined for copying and using software programs would be devastating. I mean, how would we be able to pay teacher salaries? How would we keep the school open and running, especially if we lose the state and federal funding because of this incident? Students obviously have a stake in this. They would lose access to educational software and educational opportunities provided by that software. If the publisher or author of these programs decided we couldn't use even the ones we bought, that would be a loss of educational opportunities for the kids. And of course, the loss of funding dollars would prevent us from being able to purchase other programs and additional opportunities for our students. And obviously, the authors have a huge stake in this too, because it's their programs and they're losing revenue from the sale of these programs. Now, I don't know a whole lot about the publisher, but if they're a small company, even the loss of revenue from one copied CD could impact them quite significantly. So consulting relevant stakeholders, obviously the authors of the software program were not consulted for permission to copy the programs, and I was not consulted by Mrs. Lynn prior to making those copies. As far as additional information I might need in helping me make my decisions about this, I would like to know exactly how many copies were made of these programs and to which teachers these copies were given. Do I feel like there's enough information to make a decision based off of what was provided in the scenario? Yes, I do believe I can make a pretty well-informed decision. I do that based off of my prior knowledge of copyright laws and how they pertain to educational use of materials. As the principal of the school and leader of the school, it is my job to be well-informed about all laws and regulations involving my school. So I would use, of course, my prior knowledge of the laws to help remedy this situation. And even though there are a few things that are left out of the scenario, I do have all the facts of the situation. Mrs. Lynn did not consult the publisher of the software for permission to make copies that were distributed to and used by the teachers. She also did not consult myself or the school board before making the decision to make these copies and distribute them. So the next step in this whole thing is looking at my options and the consequences that could occur. And there's a couple of different scenarios that could take place. I do have some options with this. First of all, taking no action. If I take no action, this could damage my credibility as the principal and possibly lead to me getting fired. If the authors of the program find out about the infringement of copyright laws, the school could face massive fines that are outside the school's ability to pay. We could risk losing our accreditation. We could also risk losing state and federal funds, which would make it impossible to keep the school open and running and cause us to have to send our K through 8 students along with the high school students 25 miles away to get an education. A comprehensive action, I could go to the extremes if I wanted to on this. I could collect the copied CDs and remove any software from the classroom computers. And of course, at the most extreme of actions, I could fire Mrs. Lynn and any of the teachers who knowingly use the copied software. That's a little insane. Not going to choose that option, or either of those two options. Obviously got to do something. So an intermediate strategy would be to collect all of the copied CDs and remove the software from the classroom computers, set up some professional development training for all school staff to cover copyright laws and uses in educational facilities, make sure they're aware of what they can and cannot do as far as copyright laws are concerned. The scenario didn't say if the school had an acceptable use policy for technology, so I'm going to assume there isn't one right now, so I would definitely develop and implement an acceptable use policy for staff and students with a clear set of consequences for violation of the policy. For the staff acceptable use policy, I would clearly detail what they can and cannot do as far as using copyrighted material in their classrooms. And for the students, I would make it very clear what they can do and cannot do with the materials provided to them by the school for their educational purposes. I would also include in that policy a method of reporting violations of copyright law and make it clear that reporting violations would in no way harm the teacher, staff member, or students, community members that report the violations. I would also like to hire a computer technology specialist for the computer lab to monitor the use of our copyrighted software programs and make sure that we are in compliance with all of those copyright laws. I think that would be a very important step for preventing this from happening in the future. All right, so after evaluating my options, obviously taking no action is not an option and does not demonstrate good leadership abilities. I can't just ignore it and hope it goes away and nothing ever comes of it. Going to the extreme and consequences, obviously, for those involved would be of little benefit to remedy the situation. It would be illogical to fire Mrs. Lynn or the teachers who use the copied software. First of all, it's a small rural location. Getting teachers to replace them would be pretty hard to do. Plus, it could damage the relationships between the school and the students and the community. And as a principal and leader, I know that building those relationships with our students and with our community are a major priority for all of us involved in education. So I wouldn't want to do anything that would take us to the extreme and possibly harm those relationships. Obviously, the situation needs to be resolved so that this doesn't happen again. So removing the software from the classroom computers and destroying the copied disks would need to be done immediately. A more prudent course of action would be informing the school board of the incident. They have to be made aware of what was going on, implementing an acceptable use policy, and adding in training of copyright laws to the professional development opportunities. All right, so the best option. In this situation, the best option for the students and staff and community would be to hire a computer lab specialist that understands copyright laws and how they affect the educational settings. Also, all copied CDs would be collected and destroyed, so they could not be used again, either on purpose or accidentally. Mrs. Lynn, I don't think she intentionally meant to harm the students or the school with the copied CDs. I feel like she was doing what she thought was in the best interest of the school and trying to help them, help the school save money. But she does need to be made aware of the copyright laws in the future. And since she is the librarian media specialist, I would like to have her work closely with the computer lab specialist to ensure that future purchases and use of computer and media technology are used according to all copyright laws. Training for Mrs. Lynn and all school personnel regarding acceptable use and copyright laws will be implemented and continued each year along with all the other yearly training we do, such as bloodborne pathogens, FERPA regulations, McKinney-Vento, what else am I forgetting? All of those every year trainings that we do with our school personnel to make sure that they stay up to date and understand the copyright laws and acceptable use in an educational setting. In addition, to make the community and students aware of copyright laws, an acceptable use policy will be created and added to the student handbook. Students and their families will be required to read and sign an acceptable use policy document that states they have read the school's acceptable use policy and understand the consequences of using copyrighted materials without consent. Any students who do not return the signed copy of the acceptable use policy will not be allowed to use the computers until they have agreed to comply with those policies. So how am I going to go about implementing my decision? So first of all, I need to address the school board about the situation and present my plan to remedy the problem for moving forward. It's very important that the school board be made aware of what's going on. I don't want them getting secondhand information from the community, and I don't want them blindsided by the publishers of this software if they approach the school board members about it. So I definitely want them to be aware of what's going on. I want them to be aware of my plan for fixing this situation and moving forward. And of course, I want their input as well. They may have ideas that would better help me implement this plan and for going forward. So definitely want their feedback and input. I also plan to meet with Mrs. Lynn and reflect and evaluate the copyright issue and discuss actions she needs to take now and in the future to prevent copyright infringement. Again, like I said, I don't feel like she intentionally did this to harm anybody. I think she did have the students and staff's best interests at heart when she did this, and she was just trying to do the best she could with the funds available to the school. So I would like to invite her to be part of the team to plan our professional development training for copyright law. I feel like that she would be a huge asset to helping us develop the training. I also feel it's very important to hold a staff meeting to reflect and discuss the situation and the steps that we are taking as a school to remedy and mediate any problems that may result from the distribution of the software programs. The staff does need to be informed, just as the school board needs to be informed. Everybody needs to know what's going on and what plans and steps we're taking to remedy the situation and prevent it from happening in the future. Also, obviously, we're going to retrieve and destroy all the copies of the CDs used for the classroom computers. If we can get the funds, maybe through another fundraising event, or if there are leftover funds from the original purchase, we can look at purchasing more copies of the software program and installing them on those classroom computers. But we definitely need to destroy any of those that had been copied. With the school board's approval, of course, I'd like to hire a computer technology specialist to monitor the computer lab and ensure software programs are used by the school are used in a manner that does not violate copyright laws. I think it would be very prudent and beneficial to have an expert on board that is constantly monitoring what we're using and how we're using our educational programs. I would also like, with input from the teachers, Mrs. Lynn, and the computer technology specialist, to develop an acceptable use policy for staff and students at the school. Upon school board approval, I would like the handbooks updated to include the policy and have those distributed to the students and staff with the full understanding that the policy is for the well-being and success of all students and staff at the school when we are using computers and software technology. And again, I'd like to implement a professional development training plan for all staff in the use of technology and software programs that align with copyright laws and the usage of copyrighted materials in an educational setting. And with that professional development, create a plan for continuous training for staff to stay up to date and aware of copyright laws and the usage of copyrighted materials in an educational setting. I would also consider having part of the new teacher training focus specifically on copyright laws and what they can and cannot do, not just with technology, but with textbooks and other materials they might use in their rule that fall, or in their classes that fall under the copyright laws. So in implementing my plan, who needs to know? Obviously the staff and the school board need to be made aware of the current problem and the copied software programs and the steps that we are going to be taking to prevent future copyright issues. The students, the staff, and the community need to know about the new acceptable use policy and the new computer technology specialist who will monitor all technology used at the school to ensure that we are adhering to the copyright laws. They will be made aware that they have to sign this acceptable use policy in order to use any of the school's computers or technology or programs. So dealing with the persons involved on my own. Again, I can't state it enough. I do not feel like Mrs. Lynn intentionally broke the copyright laws. So I really don't think that I need to go outside of the school to handle this other than informing the school board of the incident. I think this definitely can be handled in-house. So I should be able to meet with and discuss the issue with Mrs. Lynn and any teachers who use the copied software programs. And obviously I want to warn people of the consequences. I don't want to threaten them. I don't want to be intimidating or bully my staff into doing what I want them to do. So my meeting with Mrs. Lynn will warn of the consequences of breaking copyright laws and the impact of doing so could have on the school. Everyone needs to understand the consequences of our actions, but there's not a need to make the staff feel intimidated or threatened by the consequences. For the well-being and future success of all staff involved, I feel that the situation was caught early and actions were taken immediately to remedy the problem. So there's really no need to threaten the staff or Mrs. Lynn with severe consequences. They need to be made aware of the severity of the consequences at the extremes, but I don't think I need to threaten or intimidate my staff. That wouldn't do well for maintaining good relationships with them. So what happens if my chosen plan of action doesn't work? I just step back and punt, improvise, adapt, and overcome. My plan B would be to enact consequences according to the new acceptable use policies for staff and students. No matter what happens, whether the publisher gets angry, finds out and gets angry, wants to sue the school, whatever, we will have an acceptable use policy for staff and students, and I will be consistent in enacting the consequences of that acceptable use policy. In the event the school board does not approve the hiring of a computer technology specialist, being a small school, maybe the funds just won't be there for it, I would look at seeking permission to train Mrs. Lynn or maybe another staff member to fill that position and work to ensure the school does not repeat the copyright issue. Obviously, as the principal of the school, the safety, security, and well-being and success of all of my staff and students is priority number one for me. So whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, I will find a way to make it work and make sure that all of my students have access to the programs they need for a successful education before moving out of my school and on to high school and their future endeavors in life. This was definitely an interesting scenario to look at and to think about, and it has made me reflect on what I currently do in my classroom as a teacher. I really don't have any intention in the future of becoming a principal, but I do hope to continue working with my school and in my current position as an online teacher to help the school develop technology programs for students to benefit them in their education and their future endeavors. So I have taken this scenario to heart and have taken a closer look at what I'm doing in my role as a teacher and in my classroom and how I'm using materials that I present to and use with my students that could have copyright laws that could impact both my students, myself, and my school. And I've definitely been made more aware of what I need to do to avoid inadvertently infringing on copyright issues. Thank you for your time. Thank you for looking at my presentation. I do hope I've covered everything to the best, to the requirements of this assignment. Again, it was very interesting and very thought-provoking assignment. Definitely stuff I will keep in mind and use as I move forward in my own career. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.